I remember the first time I was using GPT-3, it was this oh my god moment because any question I asked it, it would give me an answer. And so it's like, imagine that you had this one wish granted for your life and it could be anything. It sounds cool until you're kind of actually standing there and then you're like, okay, wait, what do I ask, right? And it's the same with GPT-3 and ChatGPT. These names, man. This is game changing. This is gonna change the world. I need this because it's gonna help me do my work much better. It's gonna take the boring stuff away so that I can focus on what I actually like doing. Like this, if I know how to use it, this is gonna be insane. So I kind of got obsessed with it. I tried to just give every question that I could come up with in my mind. And so eventually I started seeing that, you know, it's difficult to get the consistency in the answers right, but there are actually strategies on doing it well. And that's what I want to talk about today. What I want to talk about is how you get ChatGPT to be smarter. The first thing is quite interesting because it reveals a lot about the structure of large language models, which is the technology behind ChatGPT. It reveals the structure because it's very interesting. So imagine you gave it this math or logical reasoning problem, something like, well, you know, Sam and Sarah, they're dividing a piece of cake and then they're each paying this amount of money for the cake, and then Sam has twice as much pieces of cake than Sarah, and you ask how much money each of them has to pay. Something like this, where you really need to think about and have a couple of steps. Okay, I have first this and then that and then that, and then you come up with the answer. If you ask it straight up for the answer, it's very likely that the answer is going to be wrong. And the reason for that is ChatGPT cannot think. It doesn't have the capability to do logical reasoning. But what it does have is the capability to generate text, including the capability to pretend as if it's logically reasoning. And it turns out that if it's doing that, the responses will actually become better. So the way you actually use this is you have this problem, and then underneath you ask it, please think through this problem step by step. And then it's a lot more text. It's okay, first we do this, then we think about that, then we do this calculation, and then much more often, it's actually correct what the output will be. Now, I tried to find an example for this to show you with or without, but I couldn't because it's always giving me its steps in reasoning. And I think that this is a recent thing that they've done with ChatGPT, where they're training it to kind of automatically think step by step because they know that this improves the answers. So at this point, it's not that much of a strategy anymore, but it does give you a bit of an insight in the internal way that these models work. Okay, so let's go to the next thing, which is called reflection. Now, it turns out that if you ask ChatGPT for something or you instruct it to do something, and then you tell it, well, please reflect on your previous response, find points where it could be improved, give me feedback, and then you ask it, incorporate the feedback into the answer, it gives a much better answer. Which is kind of crazy because, like, why don't you give me the good answer in the first place? And again, this reveals how this thing works internally. It doesn't have this concept of reasoning. It doesn't understand that it should try to give the most insightful, interesting, smart answer as possible. It doesn't really know that. So you need to tell it explicitly. And with reflection, that is one of the ways that we do this. So here's an example where I asked it to give me a day planning based on my situation. Like, okay, it's 11 a.m. I need to do this and that, and I don't know if I have time to do everything. Please give it to me. And it says, okay, first do this, then do that, then do that. Okay, interesting. Then I ask it to give a critical reflection on that response and list out possible mistakes, omissions, and feedback or room for improvements. Next, I asked it actually, what do you need to do in order to be able to create an improved answer? Which is sort of the strategy pattern, which we'll talk about after. But then I just said, okay, create an improved answer. And this timing that I gave, it's much better. For example, it includes lunch break, because maybe I need to eat around lunchtime. So this is interesting, very useful. You can do this once or you can do this multiple times. However, I have found that doing it 2 or 3 or 4 times, it kind of gets stuck in the pattern because ChatGPT also learns from examples, including the examples above in the conversation. So like the first round of improvement is much better, but then if you go to a second or a third round, it doesn't get as, like it doesn't improve as much. It might work better if you copy paste the response into a new conversation and ask for feedback and improvements in that new conversation because it forgot the previous part and it doesn't get stuck in those examples that it gave by itself. Okay, strategy. This is especially useful for longer tasks where you, for example, you want to write out a little book, a little ebook. This is something that doesn't fit in one response because it's super long. And also you want to make sure that you have a clear sight of the structure of the book because ChatGPT, it can kind of lose track of kind of the higher purpose of everything. What really helps there is asking it first to create a strategy. Like, please zoom out to the 10,000 foot level, give me a strategy, the steps I should take, and then I'll tell you, go do the next step. And then you just go say, do the next step, do the next step, do the next step, and then we'll get there. An example for this here is here. So I said, okay, we will work towards the following goal, writing a guide to help people maximize their productivity when programming. I said, start by writing down the strategy, then we will tackle each step separately. I will say next step, and your response will be current step this, execution, colon, this. That's it, write a strategy. So this is another little strategy I used here. I asked it to repeat the step it's at. This is another way of making sure that it doesn't forget what it was actually doing. Because as it's writing out chapter after chapter of our little guide, it might lose track of the initial table of contents and it could get like all sidetracked. So this way I'm forcing it to refresh its memory, so to speak, of what it said before. And it's a good way to help it re-anchor on that table of contents and it will improve the output that we're actually getting. So after this, it's just step. I just say next step, next step, next step, and it's writing chapter by chapter. So that's interesting. If we don't do this, if you just ask everything at once, it's very short. It gives you a couple of tips, and then it says a conclusion, and then what now? I don't know. This is way too short. You could say this is way too short, and it'll give you maybe something else, but it's not going to be much longer because it really needs that strategy and breaking up things step by step in order to be able to create longer form responses. Okay, and then one more smaller tip is formatting. So for some reason, I learned this from my friend Talis, if you ask it to create a neatly formatted response, it will change the formatting, of course, but it also changes the actual quality of the content. So I ask it here for, okay, you are a superstar 10x developer from Silicon Valley, known for his joy and life and genius puns. Write a short blog post about how to be both happy and productive. So it writes something, but the content here, it's pretty generic, ChatGPT, typical. Yeah, it's okay, but it's not very inspiring. When I ask it the same question, but I just add, format the response in Markdown and use emojis, it not only looks gooder from far because it's actually formatted now and it has headings and everything, but if you read the content of this, it's better. So just because we asked it to add emojis, it's actually writing better text. And that's another insight in how these things work. Probably in the training data, because it's basically given the entire internet, probably people who have paid more attention to formatting their text and maybe added emojis, probably those people cared more about the quality of their content as well. And so it's more likely that the blog posts that have proper formatting are actually well written. So I kind of figured out that, okay, I need to look at this group of answers to format the question, and that changes the actual content. So those are a few things that actually help ChatGPT give smarter answers. Now, there's much more here, and I've covered that in my guide, Prompting Alchemy, which I've written myself. ChatGPT has not written it, because honestly, ChatGPT doesn't know about ChatGPT. Like, it knows that it's a large language model, but it's been trained on data until 2021, back when it didn't exist yet. If you ask it about the prompt engineering best practices, it tries to invent something, but it's not as good because it doesn't have the data from actual people who worked with this. So yeah, it doesn't know how it works by itself. Anyways, we can actually use certain strategies to help it improve itself. So while it doesn't know how it works, it can actually sort of self-improve. And that is the topic of another video I'm making about self-improving ChatGPT. So if you want to see that, go click there. If you want to see my full guide, check out, it's in the description. You can get it there. Thank you for watching, and go watch the next thing.